Emily, let's move on to the West Coast.
Excellent. So today we're going to be talking about mostly schools on the West Coast. Thank you, Katya, for starting us off with Yale. Now we are going to talk about Stanford. So I'm sure many of you have heard of Stanford, but I'll give you an overview. Stanford University is located in Palo Alto, California. One thing that's very important about the location is that that is in the Silicon Valley. So it's right at the center of the tech world, lots of opportunities to work with companies that are at the cutting edge of technology and at the cutting edge of business in San Francisco. The campus is really beautiful. It's in a very safe area, and they have a lot of natural spaces on campus. It's about 50-50 men and women, and it is culturally different from Yale in that the students tend to be a little more technologically oriented, a little more pre-professional, and they tend to care more about sports as well. One big difference is that Stanford has a very well-known business school, and that translates into having students who are very entrepreneurial. Stanford has a big startup culture, so a lot of the students end up going on to found their own companies. In terms of strong programs, well, it's Stanford. Every program is strong. But some programs that are particularly strong are computer science, engineering, international relations, public policy, earth systems, which is like geology and earth sciences, communications, biology, and marine sciences. But again, it's Stanford. You really can't go wrong. They have a lot of research opportunities, much like Yale. It is very easy to get internships as a Stanford student. They do follow the quarter system, which means that instead of taking 2 semesters, one fall semester and one spring semester, the academic calendar is divided into 4 quarters. This allows students to take more courses, but it also can result in a very fast-paced learning environment where if one falls behind, it can be more difficult to catch up. Now, to go into some of the admissions data, which I think is what we all are here to talk about partially, Stanford is highly selective. They have an acceptance rate of about 3.7%. They do not have early decision. They do have restrictive early action, which means that you can apply early action and receive a notification, and it's non-binding. You don't have to go if you're lucky enough to be accepted. But because it's restrictive, you cannot apply to any other programs or do that and apply ED unless you are specifically applying to programs that have a merit aid deadline or a financial aid deadline. The qualities that Stanford considers important, as you can see, are going to be its rigor of secondary school record, class rank, academic GPA, standardized test scores, application essay, recommendations, the extracurricular activities, talent, ability, and character and personal qualities. And I will say anecdotally that Stanford is looking to increase its share of really talented students who come from backgrounds where they have not gotten as much opportunity. So if you are a student who comes from a place where you don't have a lot of opportunity, but you've won some amazing international competitions, you would be a very strong candidate for Stanford, although of course nothing is guaranteed. In 2023, which is the last year for which data was available, they admitted about, I think it was 86 students from the waitlist, but they waitlisted over 1,000. So it is still not a very high odds. And they, I'm sure you can imagine, have very rigorous SAT scores. So the average SAT score at Stanford for last year was, I believe, a 1550. 75% of the class had above a 1500, and 25% of the class had above a 1560. And once you break those numbers down a little bit more, you will see also that it is very common to have a perfect math score on the SAT at Stanford. In terms of overlap schools, as you can imagine, it is a lot of other Ivies and very well-regarded institutions. So the overlap schools, the schools that Stanford applicants will also apply to, are Harvard, Princeton, Yale, MIT, Brown, Duke, Columbia, and University of Chicago. We've talked about many of those, and the ones we haven't, we will be talking about next time. Oh, and I think I was going to talk about financial aid. Sorry about that. I was going to say something and then I did not. Stanford is very expensive. It's about $80,000 a year in tuition, but as Katya said about Yale, they are very generous. They give financial aid to students who make under 100,000 with no loans. They promise to meet all need. And one thing I will say is that they are not need blind for internationals applying, but if you get in, they will meet all need. And like many other top colleges, they give a lot of need-based aid. They are very generous with that. They do not want students to not be able to come if they can't avoid it, but they do not give merit aid because everyone who is good enough to get into Stanford is deserving, and they can't narrow it down beyond that.
Great. Before we move on to the next college, I just want to let our audience know if you have any question, please type in our Q&A chat box, and Emily and I will be more than happy to answer them after we finish up our content. Thank you so much.
And I should also add that if anyone has any personal questions about what it's like to study at Stanford, my boyfriend is a CS graduate from Stanford, and his little sister just graduated 2 years ago. And I go to a lot of the alumni events with him and often end up like interacting with alumni. So I'm very familiar with the school and happy to answer any more personal questions about what it might be like to study at Stanford.
Yeah, well, I'll have one personal question. Do Stanford students are Stanford students good at sports? Because I know there are a lot of swimmers go to Stanford, like Katie
Ledecky.
Yeah, like she's there, and then a bunch of them. So the reputation of Stanford students is they're very sporty, and if someone has a special talent in sport, they will have an edge to get into Stanford.
Absolutely. So Stanford has recently reinvested in its athletics. Women's basketball, for example, is a really strong team. They spent a lot of money building a new stadium. And a lot of the people who attend Stanford are Olympic athletes like Katie Ledecky, who I have been told is very nice, as well as many other top athletes from the NFL, for example. So that is definitely something that Stanford likes. But again, you can't just be playing on your local high school soccer team. We're talking like the best in the country.
Yeah. There's a map showing by the NBC on the Paris Olympic opening day. The colleges those athletes come from. Stanford is ranked number 1. There are 36 Olympic athletes from Stanford, and UCLA is number 2, and the USC is number 3. Is that all top 3 are from California? That's really amazing. And Penn State is ranked number 4. I think there's 16 athletes from Penn State, and Harvard has 13. So my suggestion is, if you're good at sport, unless you're really good, like as Emily mentioned, your Olympic game level, try to avoid those colleges if you want to use your sport special talent.